Backpack blowers can make leaf cleanup a lot easier, but not on this one. I'll give you one chance to figure out what's wrong with this blower, and if you can't see it, well, don't worry, it'll be pretty obvious here in a minute. But fixing this blower is going to be one of the biggest headaches I've had to deal with in quite some time, and when you see the process, I'm pretty sure that it could change your mind about getting one of these. In today's video, we're going to be looking at this Homelite backpack blower, and the problem is that the pull rope is broken on it. Now, the owner's son was asked to do some leaf cleanup, and after one good pull, this was the result. I'm not going to say anything bad against the son, but I'm pretty sure they didn't want to do the job, and this would have been a pretty good reason not to. Now, I am going to try and repair this blower, but yours might be different, so this might not work on yours. So if things are not working out for you, like in the video, please ask about it. I'll be glad to answer your questions. Now, because of scheduling conflicts, this blower has been sitting for quite a long time since the day the rope broke. That means the fuel that's in the tank is mostly two-stroke oil because a lot of the gasoline has evaporated away. Also, in that time, it's collected a lot of dirt and oil all over the blower, which is not normal. This would point to some sort of fuel leak from either the carb or the fuel tank. And even though it's a bit too early to worry about a fuel leak, this would be a great time to at least clean off the dirt. That way, once we get it working again, we'll be able to spot where the leak is coming from. So is this part necessary? No, not at all, but it is quite helpful, and when you see what happens later on in the video, I think you'll agree with it too. Now, I'm using a very strong degreaser from a freight store, and I'm using it at full strength. Just be very careful using it, and also read the instructions before using it, otherwise you could get hurt. Fortunately, the dirt was only in certain places on the blower, so cleaning it wasn't a big deal, and we can get to the hard part of this repair. Now, once the cleaning was done, this is the part of the repair I was not looking forward to. For those of you who are not aware of it, this design of leaf blower is a real pain to work on, at least when it comes to the rope or the recoil. But it's even worse when you're talking about the backpack version because you have to take it practically apart. Now, there is one interesting feature on this blower, and that is the exhaust blows directly into the discharge of the outlet. So here's the first problem I've come across, and that is I can't remove the nut for one of the rubber mounts. Now, I know what's wrong with it, but I'm going to leave it here for right now and wait until I get the other nut off the mount, and then I'll show you what happened to it. So what happened was the rubber mount came apart from the end with the bolt. It turns out the rubber mounts are glued to the bolts using a large round disc. However, over time, that glue isn't going to hold up forever, and when you try to take the nut off, it could break the base from the mount. So with the blower finally off the backpack base, you can see just how the mount broke off when compared to the one that didn't break. But at least with it like this, we can now get a better grip on the disc while we take the nut off. And by the looks of the nut, it would seem that corrosion was the reason why the nut was having a hard time letting go. So here's the backpack base, and as you can see, it's nothing special. It just needs to hold what looks like a handheld blower to it. Now, besides the issue with the rubber mount breaking on us, we really haven't gotten to the hard part yet. Now, the recoil is basically sandwiched between the rear portion of the blower housing and the engine, but to get to it, it means we have to basically take this blower apart. The only good news I can tell you is this blower doesn't have as many fasteners as other brands, but you will have to keep them organized, that way you can put them back in where they belong later on. Now, since this mount is broken anyway, I'm going to completely break it. And that's because I have an idea on how to fix it, but it means I can't have it only half broken. It'll make more sense when you see how I fix it. Now, I probably didn't need to take this cover off the engine, but I'm glad I did. Now, as you can see, part of the insulation on the spark plug wire was being worn away by it. That means I'll need to clearance this part of the cover to prevent this from getting worse. Now, at this point, I should be able to separate the two housings, but that's proving to be a bit more difficult than I thought. However, it turns out this sticker is the only thing keeping the housing together. Now, I could just tear it or cut it in half, but I want to try and keep it intact the best I can. The reason why is because this is one of the only identifying items on this entire blower, so I can't lose it. So after applying some alcohol to it, I was able to release the adhesive and finally take it off. And as you can see, with the sticker gone, the housings easily come apart. Now, the recoil is sandwiched between the rear housing and the engine. That means we'll need to take the impeller off to get to the bolts that hold the engine to it. You don't need to use an impact to take this nut off, but it won't hurt either. Now, once the impeller is gone, you should be able to get to the 4 bolts holding the engine to it. Of course, you could do all this with simple hand tools, but if time is not on your side, having power tools will make this job a lot easier to deal with. So after all that hard work, we finally got to the back of the rear housing where the recoil is located at. So as you just saw, this was a lot of work and also quite the hassle when compared to other models with the recoil on the back of the engine and not on the front like this one was. Next, we need to get to the recoil, so we'll take off this metal guard. Now, come to find out later on, I really didn't need to take these retainers off to get to the recoil pulley, but it will give me a chance to inspect the recoil spring, seeing as how it took so much effort to get to this point. And to be honest, this has to be the best looking spring I've ever seen on a machine this old. After that, we can then take the pulley off the cup for the spring and remove the leftover piece of old pull rope. Now this rope wasn't that short to begin with and was sized for a normal pull from a resting position to your shoulder. However, if you decide to extend your arm past the shoulder is when we get into trouble. And because of this, I'm going to have to add at least another foot to the length of the new rope. But if you intend on making the rope longer, make sure the new rope isn't too thick, otherwise you'll run out of room on the pulley. Now, if for some reason you're not sure on what size of rope to get, just take what you have to the hardware store and have an associate help you figure it out. Otherwise, you can take it to a small engine shop and they should have more than enough rope for your project. Now, after sizing the rope, I'll then pass it through the opening in the pulley and then make a knot in it to secure this end. Now, the knot doesn't have to be anything special, but I would make sure that it's at least tight. After putting the knot in the opening in the pulley and before we put it back into the housing, I want to put some lube on the spring. Now, this part is not needed, however, it couldn't hurt either. After feeding the end of the rope through the guide and the housing, we'll now install the handle. Now this would be a great time to upgrade the handle, especially if it was broken, but you can always change it later on as well. Now from what I can tell, this is the original pull handle and it's still in great shape, so I won't be changing it. Now when installing the cup and spring, make sure the exposed end of the spring lands on this anchor in the housing. And if you don't and miss it, it could cause the spring to work up until a point when the end of the spring lets go of whatever it's holding on to. Now before we install the pulley, I'm going to spray some lube on the part that spins against the post in the middle. I'm not sure if I need to, but I don't want to miss the chance, otherwise I'll have to take the whole thing apart again. Now I need to pull in some of the rope, that way we can put it into a notch on the edge of the pulley. Now using the notch will make it a lot easier to wind the spring by turning the pulley using the rope to help out. Now I'm not going to show it in its entirety, but I started off by putting 4 turns on the spring. Then I let the rope wind up on the pulley to see just how much rope I had left hanging out of the housing. Now after doing this, I realized I had a couple of inches still left outside of the housing. That meant we had to put a few more turns on the spring. I then put 2 more turns on the spring and that pretty much pulled in all the extra rope back in. I then replaced the 2 retainers to help secure the cup for the spring, followed by the metal guard. I'm not sure if you can get away without replacing the metal guard, however, I don't intend on finding out. Now before I put any fuel into the tank, I want to flush out all that oil that was left in the tank. Of course, I'm not just going to throw it away, instead I'll put that oil into my chemical bottle to use to help prime my engines. Once the hard part is done, all we have to do now is to put the blower back together and try to remember where all the fasteners go. Also, don't forget to install this metal tube on the shaft, otherwise your impeller is going to be pressed against the rear housing and it won't spin. Then install the 4 bolts that hold the housing to the engine, followed by the washer, impeller, the keyed washer, and the nut. I know I said power tools weren't really needed for this job, however I would recommend using one when tightening the nut for the impeller. Now after tightening that nut, I would then check and make sure that the impeller is not stuck, because it would be a whole lot easier to fix now than when you get the blower back together. Now that we know the impeller is not stuck, we can then replace the outer housing followed by all the fasteners. After that, we just need to install the blower back onto its base. Now, if your impeller happened to be stuck, then I would check that you didn't forget to replace either the metal tube over the shaft or the metal washer. Both of those parts help to keep the impeller from getting too close to the rear housing, and when they're missing, the impeller will make contact with it. So here comes the part where I need to explain how I'm going to deal with that broken rubber mount. Now, I could have just bought another mount, but what I did instead was to drill a hole through the mount and put a long bolt through it. It's sort of like the idea of using hockey pucks and a long bolt for a makeshift motor mount or body mount for a car or truck. It's not ideal in any way, but it works and it's better than a solid mount. Now, we're almost done putting the blower back together. All we have left is putting the blower tube back on along with a throttle handle. The last thing we need to do is to put some freshly mixed fuel into the tank, and then all we have to do is follow the instructions on this label. Now, if possible, try and use 100% gasoline with no ethanol, but if you can't get some, try using additives to help out. So according to the instructions, all we have to do is move the switch to run, engage the throttle latch, turn the choke lever to full choke, and then press the purge bulb several times. Now once I see that there's fuel in the bulb, I'll then try and start it. So as you just saw, it started fine. However, once I moved the choke lever to no choke, the engine stopped immediately. Let's try that one more time and confirm that it's not going to do something different. Well, that pretty much confirms that we have a problem with something in the fuel system, which is probably going to be related more than likely to the carb. We won't know until we dive further into it though. Now, unfortunately, we'll have to wait for another day, but I'm hoping a simple carb adjustment will fix it. But then again, I usually never get what I want, so I don't expect this one to be anything easy to fix. I'm also seeing some wetness around the fuel tank, which could mean we either have a fuel leak from the carb or the lines. That means we might end up having to service the entire fuel system in the next video as well. Now, all in all, this is a very good blower. However, because it's old and from a smaller brand, parts might be hard to find for it, and you'll see what I mean in the next video. So my question is, would you ever get a blower like this after seeing how difficult it is to work on the Recoil? If I had a choice, I would definitely pass on it, but then again, beggars can't be choosers. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.